Hello, everyone, and welcome to Renewed Minds. Today, we're going to be getting into the first of a series of videos in which I'm going to try to share with you all the way that God has been shaping my view of the world and of the Bible over the last few years. I think that this is more in line with the way that the ancients saw the world, and it's more in line, I think, with the way that the writers of the Bible saw things than our modern perspective. And so I hope that you find this to be helpful. And if there are things in what I say that concern you, I encourage you to please reach out and give me pushback, give me feedback. The whole point of this is to invite the rest of you along and on this journey in order to make sure that we're moving forward towards something that's grounded, that's biblical, and not towards something that's kind of crazy and occultish. So hopefully we can avoid that error and open up the scriptures for each other a little more clearly. So today, what I want to get into is an ancient view of spirit and of body, trying to recapture that and trying to recapture how those two things come together in the mind of the ancient person to form a being. So spirit in the ancient mind, and this I think is well justified if you look at interlinear books and things like that. Spirit is that which unites and animates the body. So there's kind of two parts or two aspects to any being, and the spirit is that aspect which animates, which unites, which gives purpose and identity to a body. We see in Genesis when God forms man out of the dust of the earth, he's not alive until God breathes the breath of life into him, and that word breath is the same word that's used to mean spirit. There's a lot of other words that are used as analogies and as pictures of the spirit. It's an ethereal thing by nature, and so there are a lot of different pictures that are needed to capture the full breadth of it. So when you hear me using things like words like head or the principle or the name of a thing, by all of those, I mean spirit. Then the other aspect of a being is the body. So the body is that which gives expression to the spirit. We understand pretty clearly how the body without the spirit is dead, but the spirit without a body, that's something that we don't understand as well, because we don't have that experience. And we don't see that side of reality until we actually die. And so, but I think the ancients had this concept that the spirit is not realized. It has no foothold in the world. It has no way to actually express itself or be real in the world without the body. And so, just as the body needs the spirit also has need of the body. And there are different sorts of bodies, and that's actually a lot of where our confusion comes from. Because we have this materialistic mindset, we tend to think, every time we think of the body, we think of it as our body, and that's like the only kind of body we tend to be able to think of. But we know from the scriptures that that's not the only type of body. Let me read 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and starting in verse 35. So here Paul is talking to the Corinthians about the resurrected body. And he says, "But some will say, how are the dead raised up? And with what body do they come? Foolish one, what you sow is not made alive unless it dies. And what you sow, you do not sow the body that shall be, but mere grain, perhaps wheat or some other grain. But God gives it a body as he pleases, and to each seed its own body. All flesh is not the same flesh, but there is one kind of flesh of men, another flesh of animals, another of fish, and another of birds. There are also celestial bodies and terrestrial bodies, but the glory of the celestial is one and the glory of the terrestrial is another. There's one glory of the sun, another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars, for one star differs from another star in glory. So we see here that at least in the mind of Paul, there are all sorts of different kinds of bodies. And so I want us to kind of free ourselves from this conception that a body has to be a physical thing. And that's actually what makes a being spiritual, is that its body is a spiritual body. It's not necessarily a physical body. We know that angels can take on physical forms. We see that happening in the scriptures. But usually, most of the time, in most situations, angels are not taking on physical form. They have spiritual bodies. And we'll talk a little bit later about what the nature of that spiritual body is and how that works. Now, there is in this two directions of error that I want to avoid. I say directions of error because there are several philosophies that fall prey to each of these directions of error, and so they're a little bit broader than a specific philosophy. And the analogy or the thing that I think captures this pretty well is some of the stuff that's been coming out of Disney lately. I'm a dad. I have kids. I have a little girl, and she watches a lot of Disney, and so I'm going to tend to jump to that for analogies for things from time to time. But the song "Colors of the Wind" in the movie Pocahontas captures both a pretty good critique of the materialistic error, and also displays a pretty good example of the paganistic error. And those are the two directions of error that we want to avoid. So the materialist or the scientistic error, you can see the critique of that in the verse that says, you think you own whatever land you land on. The earth is just a dead thing you can claim, but I know every rock and tree and creature has a life, has a spirit, has a name. The problem with the materialistic view of things, and even our Christian view of things is infected by this, is that the materialistic view of things tends to deaden the world. It tends to see only those things that are living as having spirits. So for example, we tend to think of, people have spirits, angels are spirits, demons are spirits, God's a spirit, and we might even stretch a little bit and say, well, animals have spirits too, because they move around on their own. But the thing to recognize is that the ancient mind actually saw everything as having a spirit. The spirit, like I said, is the identity. It's the uniting principle that makes a thing one thing. So a good example is a chair. So when you look at a chair, you can recognize, okay, that's a chair. But then if you break it apart, it's not a chair anymore, right? It has lost that spirit that unites it, that makes it one thing. And so now it's just a bunch of pieces of a chair. But even then, you can still even recognize then that it has the potential to be a chair, right? These pieces of a chair, they're like potential chair parts, but they're not part of a chair right now. And you could fix it and it could become a chair again. But right now it's not a chair because it's not united. It doesn't have that function, that place in the world of being a chair, being something to sit on. And so it's lost its spirit, right? It's a dead chair in a sense, which is kind of a weird way to think about it, but that's like kind of the ancient way of seeing things. The other direction of error is the direction of Gnosticism or pantheism or panentheism. Hinduism is another example of this error. And that is to overemphasize the spirit and to say that the physical is either corrupt or illusory or just doesn't matter in some sense. And this too is just as much of an error. And this is an error that the early church really struggled with for hundreds of years. And it's captured I think in a lack of distinction, a lack of understanding that different beings are different beings, that there is separation between them, and there is also a hierarchy of being. So again, in the song "Colors of the Wind," we see a little bit later in the song, she says, "The river and the rainstorm are my brothers. The heron and the otter are my friends. And we are all connected to each other in a circle in a hoop that never ends." And so here we see a lack of distinction. We see a lack of the recognition that humans are, in fact, another order of being over and above animals. The heron and the otter are not our brothers, they're not our friends. We are their stewards. God has set us as stewards over the whole earth. And so we're a higher order of being than animals. And animals, in fact, are a higher order of being than plants. And plants are a higher order of being than rocks. And so there's this hierarchy of being. And then above humans, at least for now, above humans are the angels. And always above everything is God. And he is, in fact, so far above that he even transcends the category of being itself. God is being. That's what Yahweh means. He's not a being. He is being. So that's the second direction of error that we want to avoid, is that Gnostic, that pantheistic, that pagan view of things that puts us as just another creature here on this earth. Which, again, ironically, you kind of come full circle and come to with materialism, because materialism says that we're just another animal, right? That falls to that same error. And so there's two applications that I want to pull out of this. And the first one is that this is, in fact, the pattern of all beings. That all beings have spirit, they have identity, they have something that unites them and makes them one thing. And then they have body, which is an expression of that identity. Okay, and you need both for a thing to exist. A body can take on all kinds of different forms, right? But the spirit does need a body. The body is the expression of the spirit. And what that means is that we can actually use the patterns that we see in other beings in order to better understand our own pattern of being, in order to better understand our own place in the world. And that's how symbolism works. Symbolism means to throw together. And so it's this symbolism is this thing that recognizes a similarity in the patterns between different things, and allows you then to extrapolate truths that might be hard to see otherwise. We'll get into that in a little bit more depth in another video. The second thing that I want to pull out of here is that this pattern also allows us to better understand the world around us, and in particular to better understand society and the way that society moves and changes. And that's because it allows us to understand spiritual beings better. So I want to quote a couple of scriptures here. So in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, Paul introduces the fact, and this wouldn't have been new knowledge to the church at the time, but it's kind of newish to us. But Paul kind of reaffirms here the fact that there's more than one kind of spiritual being. So Paul says, "We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places." And so we see these different types of beings that Paul recognizes in his worldview. And these are all spiritual beings that have spiritual bodies. And so I'm going to introduce one type of spiritual being and one type of spiritual body that can hopefully help us to understand the way that group dynamics shape society. And A good example of this is actually the church. So if we look at Matthew chapter 18, verse 20, Christ says something to his disciples that I think is illuminating. Oops, that's Mark. Matthew 18, verse 20. Christ says, "For where two or three are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them." So what Christ is describing here is the most basic form of spiritual body. And that is when we come together as groups of people, there's a spirit to that congregation. So where two or three Christians gather together, hopefully, if we're acting as Christians, the spirit that forms the identity of that group is Christ. He's the one that unites and defines who we are as the church. And we are his body. We are his expression in the world. But even outside of that, the same thing is true of any grouping of people. When you gather together with your friends, there's a certain spirit to that group. There's a certain spirit to that gathering. And there are things that you like to do. There are ways of speaking. There are inside jokes, and you do these. You slip into that spirit without even noticing, and you start to kind of act in a different way than you do when you're alone or when you're with a different group of friends, and that's because together your group forms the body of a spirit that is kind of rising up out of that group. I want to give there's a particular example of this from history that I think is really telling and helps to see how this can have far-reaching implications when there are a lot of people gathered together in an organization. And that's the story of the long telegram. So at the beginning of the Cold War, the intelligence agencies of the U.S. and of the West in general were treating Russia as an ally. They wanted to treat Russia as an ally. And that makes sense because Russia was our ally during World War II. And, it was still, World War II was not that far in the past. And so the intelligence agencies were still treating Russia like an ally. That was kind of the policy. And over time, a realization started to develop in anyone who actually had boots on the ground, who was actually making contact with Russia, and it was working its way up the chain of command. And there came a point where one historian kind of described it as basically everybody knew that Russia was positioning themselves as our enemy, and yet the official policy of the organization remained Russia is an ally. And everybody, they knew Russia's an enemy. We can't continue this official policy, leaders included here. And yet everybody felt like, well, if I say something, I'm the only one that thinks that. If I say something, then I'll get in trouble, and everybody will, I'll get fired, or I'll get excised, or people won't want to work with me. And so there was a spirit in the organization that said Russia's an ally. Russia's an ally. And everyone was acting as an expression of that spirit, even though they individually knew that Russia was an enemy. And this is how the expression, how spiritual beings express themselves. And the kind of some of the lowest forms of spiritual beings, lowest as in closest to our experience, are ideas and ideologies. And that's the way that those spiritual beings express themselves in the world, is through our actions, through our attitudes, our thoughts, our words, through us, basically. We together, collectively, in our gatherings and in our organizations, in our communications with each other, form the bodies of these spiritual beings. And so Jung, the philosopher Carl Jung, had a quote that really encapsulates this phenomenon. He said, people don't have ideas. Ideas have people. And what I want us to pull out of this is two particular applications. First of all, be careful what idea or ideology you are expressing, you are giving body to. Because when you express an idea, when you give body to an idea, you're giving it power. You're giving it the ability to act in the world. And so you want to make sure that you understand what it is that you're giving body to. And you don't just naively repeat things that you think sound good, or things that like kind of resonate with you, without really exploring the ramifications of those ideas. Um, this is what happens a lot of times in the world, and this is why we get so divided politically, because we have people that they kind of choose sides based off of, well, I like this thing about this ideology, and so I'm going to put my power, I'm going to put my strength and my I'm going to express this ideology because I agree with this piece of it. But they don't look at the whole of the thing, and as a result, as this ideology works itself out, um, it can become something monstrous. It can become something demonic, because it's not just you that is expressing this ideology. It's not just you that's forming the body of this thing, and the spirit of the thing actually determines the shape and the function of the body. So you might be doing something, or trying to do something that's laudable, that's positive and good. But if you're not careful, you can join yourself to a spirit uh, that is overall working terrible things in the world. Um, we see this happening in protests that turn into riots, right? The people show up to do a protest. They have a movement. They have an idea that they're trying to argue for and to demonstrate for. But there's also people in that group that are just angry, and that are expressing a spirit of rage and of revolution. And if the people in the protest aren't careful, what happens is that spirit of anger and rage and revolution takes over, and it winds up just destroying. And that's when it turns into a riot, when it turns into a mob. Um, so be careful what kind of a spirit you attach yourself to. Okay. Always, always, always be submitting yourself to Christ, and in all of your actions, in all of your engagement in this world, do it prayerfully, and be looking to the Scriptures to make sure that the thing that you're a part of is not being captured by the demonic. Um, the other thing that I want you to take out of this is that those people that are a part of those spirits that you might feel are captured by the demonic, they're still people, and there, but for the grace of God, go you, right? Just because the actions that they take, or the actions of the group that they're a part of, the actions that group engages in, are horrible in your eyes, that doesn't mean that the people that are involved in that are first of all, that they all are bought in. Um, some of them might just be deceived. Some of them are trying to fight against that spirit, and trying to accomplish something good, and they might succeed in the end. And then they're your brother, right? Then they're right. If they're accomplishing something good, if they're able to turn that spirit away from the demonic and towards Christ, then that's a force for good. You want to encourage that. And then also, even those that are bought in, and that are doing the demonic, that are a part, that are wholly bought into the demonic aspect of that spirit, you don't get that way out of nowhere. A spirit, the spirit actually shapes the body. And so recognize that you're in as much danger of becoming a part of a demonic spirit as these people are. That they're in that position because over time, in their engagement with this spirit, they have been shaped to reflect the character and the aspect of that spirit. There's a psalm, I think it's Psalm 115, I could be wrong though, that talks about people that worship idols. It says that these idols, they have eyes but they do not see, they have ears but they do not hear, mouths but they cannot speak, hands but they cannot touch, and all these things, they're basically they're dead. And it says that those who worship them are like them. When you give yourself to a spirit, you are conformed to the image of that spirit because you're part of its body. And the body eventually changes to reflect the spirit of the thing. Um, in our case, we want to make sure that the body that we're part of primarily is the body of Christ, and that we're not being conformed to the spirit of the world or to some worldly spirit, but rather that we're being transformed through Christ by the renewing of our minds. So that's my encouragement for you. Watch what spirit you're a part of. Be sure to test the spirits and make sure that they're in line with the scriptures and in line with the Spirit of Christ. And have grace for those that have been captured, that have been possessed by these ideologies that you disagree with, by these movements that you see as demonic, because again, you're as flawed as they are. Maybe not in the same exact ways, but you are as flawed as they are. We're all fallen, and we all have the potential to be just utter demons. And so, have grace and seek to rescue the those people from that spirit. As Paul said, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers.